Well, welcome everyone to our Kepler College Astrology Book Club author Q&A. My name is Misty Lane and I am your book club admin. Our October book of the month was Astrology and the Lives of People, Finding Compassion, Character, and Heroism in the Horoscope by Joseph Crane. Joseph has been an astrologer and student of astrology for over 35 years and working with a broad range of applications. Reflecting his personal background, Joseph has worked extensively as a counselor and astrologer for those in addiction recovery. He also teaches astrology for Kepler College. Us. Joseph has been a Buddhist practitioner in the Tibetan tradition since the 1980s, and he is the author of several astrology books, including our book of the month. And we are streaming to you live today so Joseph can share his expertise with club members and answer questions our readers have about his book. And I will be keeping an eye on my chat, as I said, so please ask any questions you have along the way. So, Joseph, to get started.
Yes, get me started. Get me started.
um, well, I gathered while reading this that this was a big project for you in 2020. So I think I know a little bit about the answer, but why did you feel called to write astrology in the lives of people in the first place?
There's never one cause. I talk in the preface about sort of the process that led me there. Um, Beginning with just wondering about virtue and about what makes a good astrologer, then looking at my clients' lives, and then working with a lot of people who I felt were exemplary individuals. I did a lot of astrological profiles on them, beginning in 2017, ending just before the pandemic. In the meantime, Enid Newberg and I were at Kepler. We're doing all this work on developmental material and working with modern positive psychology. And I thought I could actually bring these together. We have the conceptual material, we have the clients and their lives, besides which I love telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I love telling stories about real people. I'm sort of a nonfiction kind of guy. Um, and so, here I am during the pandemic, and my therapy was to keep very, very busy.
Yep.
And so, with various Zoom groups I was doing, this was just a perfect accompaniment. And so that's how it sort of got started. And then, of course, when you're writing a book, every morning you wake up thinking about the book you're writing. And so it doesn't quite ever leave you. Although I
So you
must
just
say,
have
I was
like this
really
obsession about it then, it sounds like,
obsession. I don't know.
or
It's
a
like,
drive for it.
well, you know what happens, Misty? It's very strange. I'm almost reached the point where I can look at my book and it doesn't feel like I wrote it, but somebody much smarter than me wrote it.
That is interesting. Why
And
do you feel that way though?
because there's one thing about having something you're banging out on a word processor on your computer, and another thing entirely about like turning pages of a book and reading stuff that you wrote that actually makes sense. That it's a very interesting experience. I don't have kids, but I think people with kids probably have a similar experience. It's like, this is me and this is not me. How did that happen?
Ah, yes, I love that. I mean, I think you're onto something that, I mean, I've been thinking about because the fifth house in astrology, it's related to kids and
Hmm.
creativity. So
Uh-huh.
this is like your little kid.
A little kid. Yes, and sometimes a little kid has a really bad temper
Oh no.
and needs to be put in timeout for a while to calm down.
Well, it calmed down, it's out and published, and I'm really glad that we all got to read it. So, let me check the chat. No questions so far. So Astrology in the Lives of People is an exploration on reclaiming and developing the significance of the seven traditional bodies that often get lost in modern interpretation. And I'd like to touch on that a little bit because we do have a decent amount of group members who are more novices to astrology. So, can you explain for the group a little bit about the differences between modern and traditional astrology?
In 50 words or less. Okay. Um, Actually, let's talk a little bit about the seven planets in that context
Okay.
because they're visible.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't know if you've been had clear weather at night, but my dog insists on to having a walk at 9 o'clock pretty much every night. And I've been watching the moon going near full with this gorgeous conjunction with Jupiter. Of course, the moon is big and Jupiter is like looks tiny, but it's still Jupiter.
Hmm.
And the visible planets are visible, they are presences in the sky. And also, they are presences in our lives. I remember um, first teaching astrology and teaching people about planets, saying, this is the easiest thing you're ever going to get are these seven planets because you know them all. You know what Mars is, you know what Mercury is, you know what the moon is. Yeah, we can get some verbiage in there. Now, when we get to outer planets, it's a little dicier. We have, quote, discovered them or uncovered them. Um, and their meanings are not always clear. Although, interestingly, in the significance of the seven visible planets have been pretty consistent over the centuries. There are some changes here or there. Mostly the changes are because attributes of the seven planets were sometimes given to the outer planets instead. Like attributes of Saturn all of a sudden becomes Pluto. Now,
Hmm.
the outer planets are obviously, I mean, I use them, I believe in them. The transits disturb me as much as they disturb you or anybody else. Um, but they do so in their relationship to what's to the inner planets and the angles in the natal chart. And so you have to figure that this like the seven planets are the seven basic notes. And then you have what comes in after it. Um, so what modern astrology does do is it expands toward the invisible planets, and not only Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, but they also use Chiron. And I've never seen two books that agree with each other on what Chiron's about. It's been around us for 40 some odd years. Um, we have Eris, we have all kinds of malevolent deities out there. We also have asteroids. There's a lot of good work done with asteroids. Um, However, I find with my clients, it is much better to keep it simple. They understand Mars really well. They don't care about Eris. Um, and I never figured out what Lilith is. Somebody can, try to
Honestly,
enlighten
this
me about
this
Lilith.
is honestly just making me feel a lot better about my level of knowledge just to hear you say that because I'm over here. I know I'm just gonna plug. We do have a webinar coming up on Black Moon Lilith
Oh, that's right. That's right. Oops.
in a few weeks. So maybe that will help. But
Maybe that
I'm
will
still
help.
like,
Maybe I should show up.
there are a few things I'm like, I still have no idea what that's all about, and I hear conflicting things. So thank you
Mm.
for saying that. That just makes me feel better. Perfect. Let's see.
So there are
Um,
other differences between modern and, oh, I pretty much insist on using traditional sign rulerships.
okay, yeah.
Okay. And I never use the 12-letter alphabet.
Can you
I
explain to the group what the 12-letter alphabet is?
that the first house is like Aries, which is like Mars, and the second house is like Taurus, which is like Venus, and you go around to the 12th house
Hmm.
being like Pisces and Neptune.
Yes. Okay.
And I will anyone who uses it will get sort of a harumph from me in a
It's
nice way.
okay. So why don't you use the 12-letter alphabet then?
Oh, because they don't correlate with the fundamental meanings of the houses.
Okay.
Okay. That the 10th house is career. Okay. You have a career. You do artwork, you do astrology. That's 10th house. That's solar. That's what you would tend to do. That's not Saturn. Saturn is your oppressive boss or
Yeah.
your, or whoever wants, you to pay too much in taxes or something like that. That's Saturn. But the 10th house and the midheaven degree is sort of where that's your public persona. Saturn is a planet of contemplation. It's a planet of deep thinking. It's a planet that actually sort of hides what it's doing.
Interesting. Okay. So touching on Saturn then,
Okay.
and you touched earlier on this, on how it sounds like we're touching now on confusion between like midheaven and solar life purpose versus Saturn purpose. And you touched earlier on how a lot of Saturn's characteristics was kind of given to Pluto, which
Mhm.
I definitely noticed. I picked one of the quotes from your book to discuss in book club, and it was about Saturn. And
Ah,
I was reading it, and I was like, so much of this is, it feels exactly like what people say about what Pluto has. You call him the grave digger,
right.
decay was a word used. So on that note, then, um, especially earlier when I was first um learning about the differences between the different types of astrology and
Mhm,
modern
mhm,
versus
mhm,
traditional,
mhm.
um, there's like a lump to get over in one's head when it comes to, okay, all of these characteristics that I thought were with Pluto traditionally belong to Saturn. So, what input do you have for anyone, myself included, who kind of has some sort of lump like that to get over? What kind of insight do you have about that?
Well, first thing to do is read my book and agree or disagree.
Yes.
Okay. That astrologers are a conservative lot in a lot of ways. Um, I read traditional books, and it's really obvious that they are cribbing from other books that they have read.
Hmm.
Um, and modernists, I love to read modern astrology and try to figure out who they're reading. Um,
That is interesting. That is interesting.
and so I feel that there should be sort of a dialectical approach. Um, I like to look at tradition, but I don't stop there. Um, I'm interested in modern virtue philosophy, and I'm interested in modern positive psychology and how they can contribute to our understanding of some astrological symbolism. Um, so, uh, and the astrologers who aren't very good tend to be those who are fixed in one particular pattern.
Yes.
I like to, in my practice, I like to beta test things,
Okay.
meaning
How do
I'll
you do
take
that?
I'll take something. Oh, um, my last fancy was ascendant arc directions. Nobody's ever used ascendant arc directions. They use solar arc directions. And I think, why should solar arc directions not, you know, not use ascendant instead? So I'll sort of like look around. I'll look at it, my chart, I'll look at it in friends' charts. I'll kind of put things on, um, look at my clients, and I will say nothing about it until it strikes me as something valid. Um, I've done that with like Hermetic lots and Hellenistic astrology. Um, and I have a friend who loves to precess the solar return. It's like, okay, I'll try it for a while, see if it works, see if it's coherent, and go from there. So, and also, my training in astrology has some modern elements, some traditional elements, some Vedic, even some Hellenistic. So, I have some things to choose to pick from.
Okay, so
Um,
kind of just exploring what works and testing things, and then just trusting what you know from what you've observed,
but
it seems.
also, Misty, as an artist, you know that there are artistic styles
Mm-hmm.
and things that make the um, your artwork coherent and something that you can use to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think of astrology more like art, an artistic style, than some kind of a scientific statistical approach. And there are
Okay,
trends.
that is true. That is absolutely true. Okay, we have a question from Alec in the group.
Ah,
He asks, Joseph, which of the seven planets' meaning evolved the most for you personally as a result of the process of writing the book?
hi, Alec. His name shows up in my acknowledgments, by the way. Um,
Oh,
let's see. I think I'm going to. I think. Well, my first impulse would say the moon, but I've been thinking a lot about the different facets of the moon for a while. But during the writing, I think of Mars as um, as a planet that has such a range of goodness and no goodness. Um, that I had to talk about abuse somewhere. Well, I had to. It was on the chapter of Mars, but also you get. I ended with Dorothy Day, who I think is more saintly than anything else. I ended my chapter on Mars with a discussion of saintliness. So, um, so I think it was not the most difficult chapter to put together, but I think it revealed to me so many different facets of Mars that I hadn't quite acknowledged previously. Um, So I think that was maybe the biggest change that I felt in the writing process.
okay. Well, on the topic of Mars and bad planets, I would love to talk about,
And planets.
yes, I'd love to talk about virtues and more, I suppose, negatively perceived planets, signs, and whatnot. So, you do have that last section, which is an exploration of character and virtues, and then character is an exploration throughout the book as well. And I think, especially for people who are newer to astrology, or even just like when they're very first becoming familiar with their chart and maybe they're just looking it up themselves and looking up things as they go along, it's really easy to get caught up in like, oh my gosh, I have a bad placement, I'm doomed. So I see a lot of when I'm in astrology groups across the internet, I see a lot of just someone being so doom and gloom about their personal chart.
Yes,
So
yes.
yes. So what do you think astrology can teach us about leading a virtuous life? Even when someone is dealing with natal placements or a concentration of energy that is painted as less than favorable.
Oh dear. You sort of have to, you kind of do this one person at a time, because I mean, there's sort of a modern humanistic astrology that every planet, every position has its positive manifestation. I'm going to extend that a little further and say that every person with a quote difficult placement has positive manifestations there already. They may not acknowledge. And a lot of the work that I do is my consulting work, astrological consulting work, is to I sort of help a client identify the positive features that are already there. And so I really don't like it when they just stop with oh, I have this terrible Sun Saturn placement, and I'm always going to be like, this wretched person and all that stuff, because
Yeah,
they wouldn't be coming to me if they felt that was true.
that's a really good point.
You know, I and I do like Suzuki Roshi was a Zen master who said, looking at an audience, that you all are perfect just the way you are, and you could all use some improvement. And I think that's sort of the attitude I take toward myself as well as my clients.
I think that is a wonderful, yeah, that's a really wonderful point that there's always going to be like a positive and negative. And what I love about astrology is that when you get beyond and when you get deeper into it, rather than being like, oh my gosh, I have, with me, I have like, oh, 8th house planets. Everyone's like, death. But it's more like, I have choices that I can keep in mind to co-create my life.
And much of the astrology that we learned growing up was stereotypical sun sign astrology,
Mhm.
especially the so-called feminine signs. Ever notice that Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, especially Scorpio, but also Capricorn and Pisces, all have bad reputations? Everybody would rather be a Gemini than a Scorpio.
Yeah, yeah, I have noticed that.
And we're so afflicted by these stereotypes that if we actually focus on the planet, we can sort of avoid all that.
Okay.
Um,
So how do you recommend someone focuses more on the planet rather than the
well, sort of,
sign?
sort of. Well, one way that um, I have in my book is sort of identify the planet that is most prominent in your chart or in your life,
Okay.
and let's go from there. Um, let's say it's Jupiter, or let's say it's Mercury. It's like, okay, let's go through the possibilities that your Mercury placement may have. It has a trine from Saturn, let's say. Okay, they're both in Earth signs. Okay, let's look at practical applications of intellect. If you're going to go to grad school, you're going to be a really good scholar, not a great visionary. You need to go other planets for their visionary stuff.
Okay.
Um, and also it becomes more personal that way. It's like Mercury is how you think, how your mind operates.
Mm-hmm. It is so true. I I have found because I have kind of unconsciously, I guess, already been doing that, associating with the planet rather than the sign. Um, and yeah, I totally see where because I have a lot of Virgo energy, and Virgo is one of those it kind of does get a bad rep, but changing that perspective, thinking, oh, Mercurial, I'm a smart girl. I have good
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
Yes.
right. And you work to get better at what you do, and you don't get arrogant about it. It's a good combination.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, that is. So if anyone in the group gets caught up on bad signs,
Bad sign. Bad sign. I'm saying this as my son is 0 degrees of Capricorn, so I'm used to like bad signs.
oh yes. Ah, the Capricorn. I shared that quote in a Capricorn group and yes, absolutely. Okay, we have no questions in the chat right now. Let me see what else. Um, let's talk about, so you said you began collecting charts of historical figures that you liked around
Mhm.
2017.
Mhm.
Um, so that you can kind of explore the planetary energies through the way that person represents them in their chart.
That's
Um,
what it wound up doing.
okay, what
I,
was that not the original intention?
my original intention was to feel better
Okay.
because starting in January of 2017, I had become extremely discouraged about the state of American and world politics. And everybody I felt was just either what's the Yeats sign that Yeats line? Um, the worst are full of intensity, and the best don't care. And so I wanted to. It's not the line. This by no means is that the line. I just can't. I'm just drawing a blank on it. Um,
That's just the
but
gist, it sounds like.
that's the gist of it. Yes.
Okay.
I'll remember it 5 minutes. I'll remember it 5 minutes after we're done. But I needed to find sort of who are the heroes in my life, people whose biographies, people had something to share. Often they had a great deal of adversity. And it turns out that many of them had been um, working against authoritarianism or totalitarianism. Many were civil rights people. Um, and some were philosophers. There were no politicians. Yeah, there were no politicians. Bunch of authors, George
Hmm.
Orwell, for instance.
I saw a lot
And
of Walt Whitman in there.
you saw a lot of Walt Whitman. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. If anybody could embody what America could be, it was Walt Whitman.
Absolutely.
Um, and and so that was my desire, just to feel better. And obviously, I put a lot of work into it, and I wanted to share with other people, and that was sort of also sort of what I can do as an astrologer.
Oh, we got a few more questions in the chat. They're coming in. Okay.
Right. All
Alec
right.
again
All right.
says this book is very original. Who are some authors who have inspired your style of writing? and approach to creating something original.
Oh my goodness.
Well, you do have a lot of author and a lot of literary references
That's
in the
true.
book,
That's true.
even if they're not astrologers.
Of course. Yeah.
I saw a big literary influence on just your writing style in general.
Well, part of it was during the time I was writing, I was also leading a Friday afternoon literature group. And um, there are many allusions to James Joyce in the book, and I think, including in the title. And part of it was I was doing a lot of work on Joyce's Ulysses of Finnegan's Wake during writing the book. But in terms of sort of whose writing I would admire, George Eliot came to my mind just now. It's a good question because um, there's sort of a controlled emotionality. Um, she's very analytical in a lot of ways, and the analytical part of her actually brings a actually um, helps to disclose some of the genuine human drama that we all go through. So I'm gonna give her a check. Um, George Orwell also, but not necessarily for 1984. Um, Obviously, that's his best known work,
Hmm.
but he has a whole bunch of essays that he wrote, especially during World War II, um, that were on daily life, but from a somewhat detached point of view. And also, his writing is superb. And
Absolutely.
I use him and Hannah Arendt in the um, Mercury Saturn part of the book as let's talk about the English language and its ability to deceive and make people stupid. So
Okay, next question. June asks, Joseph, I am very interested in reading your new book, Astrology and Lives of People. Do you think astrology can offer a moral code for people to live by? Can it make us better people?
you make us better people. The moral code is maybe implicit in the book. I don't know. Not enough time has passed since I wrote it to actually look at it in that kind of way. Um, I've always thought that every individual's chart discloses a certain moral code for that person. And I kind of look at it like that. Um, that there's some people who are um, are going to be inspiring and others compassionate and others are going to um, do wonderful things but not be particularly noticed for that. And um, I think every planet has its own moral code. And
That is
so
very true.
I don't think there's one. It's not a unitary thing. We have the Mars warrior, we have the adaptable lunar person who knows how to fit in and make things better and then move back. We have the sort of visionary Jupiterian person and the practical contemplative Saturnine type.
Okay, so there's an opportunity for moral code, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay, I do like that. Okay. Miriam asks, Hi Joe, what would you say
Is this
impacts
is this
planet
my
more?
Miriam from Rhode Island?
Uh, Miriam Judah, is
Yes,
that your
yes, yes,
Miriam?
yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, hello,
Now
Joseph,
what
it's
does Miriam
Miriam.
want? Okay.
Miriam asks, what would you say impacts planets more in a chart? Aspects or rulership or house placement?
I could take the sneaky way out and say whatever they're it depends on what they're asking about. Um, I'll tell you what I particularly like. Two things. One is aspects from planets when there's exchange of dignity somehow, or one is in the dignity of the other. Um, so for instance, you said you had lots of Virgo in your chart. So, you know, let's pretend that you have, oh, Moon and Gemini trine are square Mercury and Virgo. Okay. Both dignified by Mercury, really a Mercury combination. So I would look at things like that. Um, Venus in Capricorn or Venus in Libra with a square to Saturn in Capricorn. Um, Also, I like the um, teaching of planetary house joys that
Yes.
that Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th, Sun in the ninth, Mercury in the first, and so on. And so I always notice that. Um, but if a person has like Moon in the eighth, it doesn't mean that they're, going to be in desperate situation their entire life. It means that how they act, the ascendant and the moon have to find ways to coordinate themselves. And I'll talk about planets getting out of the 12th house into some kind of visibility and sort of good work, we'll call it.
Okay. So it sounds like there's not necessarily one thing that impacts planets m more in a chart. It's all like a recipe that goes together.
Yeah, it's like, and maybe what happens is after a few decades of doing astrology, you get pattern recognition and you
Hmm.
begin to see like, you know, so you begin to notice like what strikes you. And sometimes it's a house placement. Sometimes they're talking about a particular issue, and there's a planet with an aspect from another planet. And sometimes there's a rulership thing. Like in my book, I talk about the benefits of a debilitated Mercury.
I remember that section. There are benefits.
Of course, I have Mercury in Sagittarius, so I don't know what I'm talking about there.
Hey, if it benefits you, that's all that matters.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we covered Miriam's question. Let's see what else we have. Okay, we touched on the people. Okay, so going back to the literature featured in your book, you were running a literature group at the time, and I noticed there was a combination of quotes from and excerpts from astrological texts as well
Yeah.
as from classic literature that any well-read person might know. So, can you talk a little bit about how or why you picked the excerpts that you did? Was there
Oh
any,
dear.
were they just more reflective of the planetary energy you were getting at?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know what you wake up with ideas. Um, like you wake up thinking, okay, this is what chapter on the moon. It's like, what are some examples of a really sort of transcendently wonderful moon? And I could think astrology, but it's like, if there's some literary stuff that's really interesting. And I thought of Gilgamesh and the women saying,
Mhm.
don't go try to get immortality. Like, have a kid on your lap to hang out with. Get a life. Um, or the last paragraph from George Eliot's Middlemarch, or the Chinese philosopher, the Neo-Confucian Chinese philosopher who talked about, like sort of finding a kind of a unified cosmos. It's like, and if there was something astrological, I could have used it, but it's like these occurred to me as the most poignant examples of like a virtuous lunar activity.
Mhm.
Um, and it sort of it sort of goes on from there. When I talk about humor in the Jupiter chapter, I have to talk about like Dorothy Parker because I know Dorothy Parker. My father used to recite Dorothy Parker lines when I was a kid. I had no idea where they came from, and I found out later. Um,
That is
and
interesting.
so, in some ways, Misty, this is the most personal of the books I've written
Okay.
because it's really using my own language and the stuff that has inspired me, and the people have inspired me over, my lifetime. So, this also means it was the most difficult to write.
Aw. Well, thank you for writing it because it was a wonderful read and it taught me things.
Yay.
Yay. And I do think there's something to be said. We all have our favorite book, whether we're astrologers or not. We have our favorite books and we have our favorite movies. Our last book of the month was Alex's Mirror Mirror, where
Right.
she did movie analysis.
Yes. Yes.
And I just think there's something to be said for um, strengthening your understanding of astrology through looking like a lens through the arts, I suppose, because astrology does have all that symbolism around
Mhm.
it. It has like emotion to it. And so
Yeah.
we can, see a part of a favorite book or a scene from a favorite movie and be like, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, it's so Venusian. Oh my gosh, it's so Saturnian. I remember in that discussion we had about Saturn,
Mhm.
and I read that quote, and what made me come around to being like, oh, Gravedigger, that's Pluto, not Saturn. But what made me come around to it was the movie Holes. And I was like, oh, that movie is very, very Saturnian.
Yeah. And I think I have two responses. The one is if I'm putting the stuff that's most meaningful to me, that's actually a challenge to the reader to what's the most meaningful thing to you.
Mhm.
And so you did a fine job right there. And also, we are still storytelling species. We tell
Absolutely.
stories. And I'm doing one class on Kepler on use of narration in astrological consulting, which is great
Yes.
fun because that's where I talk about movies. Um, but I the trick is, however, to um, your one's background could be somewhat esoteric in some ways, but you still have to communicate with your client.
Hmm.
Sometimes there's a narrative that you share in common. Um, Sometimes you have to say, "Let me tell you something," and but you have to make it completely relevant to the issue at hand.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're just being professorial.
Absolutely. Yes, it is. It's all about making the other person understand. And how could you do that?
Yeah, and making the person feel understood.
Yes. Yes, that is absolutely important. And it looks like the chat has calmed down. We are out of questions. So, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us for the October Book of the Month and for joining us for this Q&A. Where can our audience find you to keep following your work?
My website is really easy to remember. It's astrologyinstitute.com. It's a wonderful domain name that I will
That is
go to my grave
pretty
with.
good one.
And my email is joseph.crane2@gmail.com.
Okay.
And I'm on Facebook.
And on Facebook. Do you have a
I'm on
Facebook
Facebook.
page or would they have to friend request you? That's important.
Friend request me. I have a Facebook page, but I don't really pay attention to it.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, very good.
Well, thank you to the group members who participated in our
Yay.
discussions, and for sharing all of your wonderful insights. If anyone is still reading and finishing up the book, please feel free to continue participating in the discussion posts. I will
Good.
still be keeping an eye out to have the discussion. I'm sure other people will as well. Otherwise, our November book of the month is Astrological Mavericks. Do You Have What It Takes to Change the World by Michael Bartlett. And I will have the first discussion post up within the next week. And I look forward to our next read. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. So have a good night, Joseph, and have a good night, everyone else.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.